So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 NAMI New Hampshire Annual Conference, Cultivating Hope, Celebrating Everyday Heroes. Thank you for joining us. If you are new to NAMI New Hampshire, we are so glad you are here. If you're a longtime member of the NAMI New Hampshire family, thank you for coming back. NAMI New Hampshire is a grassroots organization that provides support, education, and advocacy to individuals impacted by mental illness and suicide in the Granite State. We do this by offering a variety of programs and events, including today's conference. I'm Karen Prevey. I'll be one of your co-hosts for today, along with Michelle Watson. Today's presentations are in Zoom webinar, and there will not be an option to turn on your camera or microphone. We welcome questions in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to them all. You may have also noticed that we have turned off the chat feature, which can sometimes be distracting. We'd like to express our thanks to our sponsors who help make today's conference available free of charge. This session is sponsored by AmeriHealth Caritas. Thank you so much for your support. And now I'd like to introduce Liz Hodgkins, NAMI New Hampshire's Director of Adult Programs, who will introduce our next presenter. Liz.
Thank you, Karen. So Keene State graduate of 1996 and really excited. Just so you know, there was a little who chose the long straw, the short straw, to be able to introduce Professor Giulio De Sesto today. And I was very thrilled to be able to introduce you today. So welcome. Giulio De Sesto is the chair and professor of journalism department at Keene State College in Keene, New Hampshire. Woo! He teaches courses in photojournalism, multimedia production, and live streaming. He also serves as advisor to the college's award-winning newspaper, The Equinox. Giulio's professional work includes still photography, video production, and audio production. He has produced work for many media outlets, including the Keene Sentinel, Granite State News Collaborative, and New Hampshire PBS. As often as possible, Giulio includes his students in the production process. Giulio lives in Winchester, New Hampshire with his wife, 3 children, and several pets. Outside of the classroom, he's been a working musician since 2010 and a competitive gymnastics coach since 2018. Welcome, Giulio. We're really excited for you to join us here today, and I'll let you take it away from here.
Well, thank you, Liz, for that introduction. And thank you, Michelle and Karen, for inviting me and having me be part of this conference. I'm going to try not to get sort of too emotional about it. You know, it's an honor to be here and to share my story and hopefully provide some insight and some help to other people. And a little nervous still, but so I want to talk to you today about, well, my story and kind of start at the beginning. And yeah, I'm sorry, you're probably all like, well, he's going to tell his life story. And well, yeah, because it did start at the beginning. And sort of I've been learning since the beginning about my capabilities and resilience, I guess you would say. So I do want to start at the beginning where and I promise everything that I'm talking about is going to be relevant. Try to stay on topic, but all of these things that I've experienced in my life, I think about a lot, and I try to bring to my own children and to my students in particular, and to my colleagues as much as I can. And honestly, it is something that I just recently started talking about. I had some former students after I gave my graduation talk or showed my graduation video that came up to me and were kind of upset that I had never told them the story before. And so it was something that I'd really kind of kept private until recently, when I had the opportunity to speak at graduation, because I had won an award for distinguished teacher. And when I had won that award, it was sort of like, oh wow, I almost started crying. It was such an honor. And then I almost started crying because I realized I had to speak at commencement. So it was a little nerve-wracking, but I saw it as kind of an opportunity to share with my students and their families something that I thought was relevant, particularly after COVID. We, as instructors, we really noticed a difference in our students, and so I thought it was particularly relevant and maybe a little bit more meaningful than just sort of, hey, go out and get them, which I didn't find particularly inspiring. So I thought it was an appropriate time to kind of talk about it. So let me start sort of at the beginning. When I was born, I was born 6 weeks early, so I was premature, and when I was born, I wasn't breathing. So I came out, and the doctor pats you on the back, and I didn't start breathing. So I was blue, I was limp. So they rushed me out of the room, and I didn't breathe for several minutes. And so when the doctors came back in, they told my parents, he's got brain damage, and sorry, I wouldn't be able to dress myself or anything like that. So they said, don't expect them to have a normal life. I was in an incubator for 6 weeks with needles sort of all in my body to measure oxygen. And the priest had read me my last rites and all that kind of thing. So it wasn't a great start, and my limbs were sort of all contorted from the lack of oxygen, and one of my legs was really bent, and my mother asked about fixing it, and they said, well, it's not really worth it. So it was kind of a rough start, and so every night my mother would sort of massage my muscles to try to get them out of that position, and then a few weeks later, or a couple of months later rather, I was diagnosed with spinal meningitis. So I was back in the hospital for another 6 weeks. And spinal meningitis, it can be fatal, but the more significant thing is about half of newborns that get it have some sort of further brain damage or intellectual disability. So it wasn't a promising beginning, and so they had put me in this rehab facility, a place called the Kennedy Center down in Foxborough, Massachusetts, for rehab, to see whatever that they could do. And my mother told me one time that she heard the nurses say, like, why do they even bother? Because I wasn't there. Anytime they asked me to do something, I wouldn't do it, and or tried to get my attention. Anything that they tried to do, I was just not. It could have been that I was stubborn, but I think for them, they saw it as I was just not really responding. So it took me a long time to walk, to crawl, to do pretty much everything. Everything I was delayed, and I wasn't forming complete sentences, well after I should have been. But one of my earliest memories was, I remember being in the car with my mother and said, Mom, birds eat birdseed, which is a sentence. And I remember her crying. It's one of my first memories, and I was like, it's a big deal, but to her it was. So it seemed like, sort of all of a sudden I woke up. I did struggle in school. I had a lot of problems. I had dyslexia, reading comprehension issues, ADD, though at the time they just thought it was, lazy or whatever. You know, while I was in school, you know, people weren't, schools weren't as sort of sensitive to these kinds of things as they are now, which is a good thing. I'm glad that we've made progress in that area, but I think some things got ignored or not addressed how maybe they should have been. But I ended up thriving in sports and art and that kind of thing. I was into music, so I'd kind of proven everybody wrong. You know, I wasn't behind in school to the point where I had to stay back or anything. So I was doing okay, and you know, I'd proven all these people wrong, which I still love doing. I still love proving people wrong. It's sort of, it's a challenge, I think. But I remember being happy, and you know, it wasn't a bad childhood or anything. So, um, but I wonder sometimes how much that sort of rough start, affected everything else after that. And I wonder too, when I talk about what came next, how much of that could be attributed to that sort of brain damage or the issues that I faced when I was born. So everything was great, and you know, I remember being a happy kid, but right about the end of 7th grade, I started to sort of feel different about a lot of things, and obviously there's hormones flying around and whatever. So to my parents and everybody else, the teachers, it's, well, maybe it's just puberty, you know, everybody struggles with that. And so, but it was a big change because in 7th grade, it was the first time I got straight A's in school. Um, and the next year, I failed 2 classes. So I just didn't. I was terrified of everything. You know, reading in front of class or just talking to people, I was just afraid of it, and I was afraid of making mistakes. And at the same time, I also didn't care, which was kind of this weird dichotomy, I guess, of like, oh, I don't want to make a mistake, but I don't care at the same time. So it was really difficult to deal with. And I first noticed it in sports. You know, baseball had always been my life. You know, I would practice every day. And then I just stopped. So, you know, that was kind of a red flag for my parents. And I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety issues, particularly social anxiety. And the issue though was that, you know, my mother, who had experienced depression herself, understood what I was going through. My father um, thought I was just being a wimp, and that, you know, I should just suck it up, and didn't believe in, you know, mental illness as a thing. It wasn't a thing. It was just you're just being lazy or whatever it might be. So it made it hard in a couple of ways to get help, because for him it was sort of, well, why does he need to go see somebody? He doesn't need help. And at the same time, I'm thinking, you know, I'm believing him, like maybe I'm just lazy, you know, or whatever it might be. So, you know, my father would my relationship with my father, especially after this point, was not good. Um, you know, I was angry at him for a long time, and um, I did just learn some things that made a lot of that okay, but I'll get to that later. um, but I wasn't getting the help that I needed, and things got worse, and I ended up in the hospital twice for self-harming and suicidal thoughts. Um, some of that had to do with a reaction to antidepressants. Um, some of it was just how I was feeling. So, but I remember too, while I was in the hospital, a counselor saying, and I was, how old was it? 16 at the time. A counselor saying, you know, you guys, talking to us kids, right? You guys will probably spend the rest of your life in and out of hospitals like this. I'm like, oh, great. That's a positive statement. but I kind of look at that now too as like a challenge of, I'm going to take care of myself to a point where hopefully I don't need to do that again. So, um, but I really couldn't figure out what was going on. My life wasn't bad. Um, I continued to struggle in school, and the depression sort of made that worse. I was missing a lot of class and a lot of days, at school, and it actually took me 5 years to graduate high school. My first senior year, I'd missed something like 108 days, I think, because I wasn't going. Number one, I didn't care all that much. Number two, the anxiety was just too much. I was just being in a class full of my peers. I was just sort of afraid. That social anxiety part of it was just too much. And because I was so far behind, it was sort of like, well, what's the point? But I did end up eventually graduating after 5 years. It was sort of like a gift. It was sort of like, just get you out of here. And I didn't really have any direction or anything. And, I'd been talking to one of my doctors about seasonal affective disorder, and maybe the sun, help me feel better. And so I applied to a college out in Hawaii. Why not, right? It's a lot of sunshine. And I got in somehow. And I was all excited, and I went to my father, and he wouldn't sign the loan. He said he wouldn't sign a loan to see me fail. Um, so that didn't really work out. But while I was in high school, right around this time, in high school, I had met this woman. She was my guidance counselor, and I got really close to her and her family. And about that time that my father wouldn't sign the loan, um, I moved out and actually moved in with that family. And they, my relationship with my dad was so bad at that point. It was we couldn't stay in the same house, so I moved in with this family, and they sort of had a different perspective on life and on me. So it's sort of from day one, first day I met her, it was like I could do anything. So instead of I don't want to see you fail, it was you can do anything that you want to. And so they reminded me of that I had strengths and not weaknesses, and that's something that I really focus on with my students now. Everybody has weaknesses, but you have these great strengths too. So how can we, use that to your advantage and help you be successful by, utilizing those strengths. So that was sort of the first time that I had experienced that sort of viewpoint. It had always been, I'm going to tear you down and not, I'm going to lift you up. So after high school, I moved in with these people, and after high school, I didn't really do a whole lot, and ended up working at like a car wash and whatever. And then I ran into who is now my wife, this woman who is now my wife, Katie, and we had dated in high school, and I just kind of ran into her, and there you go. And I saw sort of a future for the first time. And so I decided, like, if I want a future, I'm gonna have to go to college. So I started at a community college and enrolled, and my father was like, "Are you sure you can do 4 classes?" So there's a challenge for it. But it was really difficult because about this time I started to develop panic disorder. It was really based on that social anxiety, but I, every class I would go into, I would have to sit right next to the door because I would have panic attacks. So, I kind of got worried that he was right, that I wasn't going to be able to do it. But I love proving people wrong. So, I ended up at Keene State, and I met some some amazing people here. See Liz there. And the people that lifted me up, and I graduated with a 4.0. And I think my dad was proud. So. But um, so things were great again. It's like, wow, I accomplished this great thing, and everything was great. So if you think that part of the story was emotional, wait till the next part. So things were good. I had gotten a job in Philadelphia as a photographer at St. Joseph's University, and it was a good job. I didn't like the city, but it was a good job. It was a good first job. And I was really interested in pursuing an MFA because I eventually wanted to teach. I wanted to be a college professor. And it was kind of my goal. It started off, my goal was to be a photographer, and then it just sort of changed to I had met these great people at Keene State. This is what I want to do with the rest of my life. So, and then by some sort of miracle, Nona Feinberg, who was the dean at the time at Keene State, we had been in touch, and the instructor that worked with the college newspaper, the Equinox, had suddenly quit right before winter break, and they had no one that could come in. So she sent me a message and said, "Hey, can you be here on January 18th and teach?" So, and my wife was pregnant at the time, and it was a huge pay cut. And I ended up having to break my lease on my apartment, which I still had to pay for when I moved here, which is kind of silly, but it was a big risk, but it was where I wanted to be. It was what I wanted to do. And it was an opportunity, and I knew that I needed to do it, and luckily so did my wife. Yeah, she was, like I said, pregnant at the time, and was with me. So everything was great until not too long into that appointment. I was at a department meeting, and the chair at the time said, "Well, we're going to create a tenure track for essentially what I was doing." And a tenure track, if you're not aware, you need what's called a terminal degree. So you either need a PhD or an MFA. An MFA is sort of like almost like a PhD without the dissertation. It has a thesis instead. But they're both significant degrees, and I'm sitting there like, oh, I just lost my job because yeah, I hadn't even started a degree program yet. So what happened was the department, luckily enough, wrote the job ad so that you could apply for this if you had your degree by this date, and it was essentially 2 years from when they put the job ad out. The problem is that an MFA at the very least takes 3 years to complete, and a PhD usually for communication probably 4 years. So I don't know. It didn't look hopeful, but I did find this program that out in San Francisco that did a remote MFA program, and I enrolled and I started it right away that summer. And I talked to the school and I explained my situation. I said, "Look, is there any way I can do this in 2 years?" And they said, "Not normally," but they gave me the exception. to do it. So I was working full time. I was going to graduate school more than full time. I also had a part-time job at a golf course, and my daughter had just been born. So it was just sort of like, but it was worth it. It was, to me, it was worth the risk. Like, well, and I didn't even know if I had the job yet, so I still had to apply for my job at the same time. And I did end up getting the job somehow. I mean, obviously I'm here, right? So somehow I got the job, but I had that deadline, you know, and it was kind of crazy. But I think that alone was stressful enough. But what happened during that time, during that 2-year period, was so that September, my father passed away. And the year after, so the second year of my degree program, my mother died. And I really struggled with that pretty hard, and it would have been hard enough if I was sleeping more than 3 hours a night, because I can't take a break from anything. So I'm still working full time, teaching full time. I'm still graduate school full time. I can't stop because I have that deadline. So, sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night, and somehow I finished my degree program on time with 2 days to spare. I think I finished May 10th and the deadline was May 12th or something like that. So I finished, but during that time, like I said, I'd been sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night. I actually became addicted to sleeping pills, to Ambien, which is not a good thing. And between all of those things, it just it hit the fan, and I ended up back in the hospital. And I'm sitting there in the hospital thinking, like, what am I doing here? Like, my wife is at home with a 2-year-old, got my job and whatever, and I just couldn't understand how I ended up there. And part of it again was a reaction to antidepressants, but it was everything that had just happened. The loss of my parents, my daughter being born. We had bought a house during that time. So it was just every stressful thing you could possibly think about, it sort of happened in that time. And I was still having panic attacks, and it was just a difficult time. And I ended up in the hospital, but it was really a turning point, because I sort of met a couple of people. One was a patient as well. One was a counselor, and the patient was sort of a lot like my dad, and he's someone who had been homeless and struggled with, um, alcohol dependency, and was really in rough shape. And he was like, "What do you have to complain about?" He's like, "You're a professor. You have kids, a family. I lost my family." So there was that, who reminded me a lot of my father. And there was also a counselor who he was my age. He wore a Red Sox hat like I did. I mean, like he was talking to me directly. Um, and they really, made an impact on me. And so for the first time, I started to really try to take care of myself, and, sort of learned a lot about meditation and breathing, and started exercising more, and tried to find a different perspective, a more positive sort of outlook. And so once again, things started to get okay. I had a good life. I started to really um, appreciate, my life, and what I had and where I'd gotten to, and things were great again. And And then again, something happened. So in 2018, January 2018, my son was born. So my third child was born on January 6th. And I remember how cold it was when we brought him home. It was like 20 below when we brought him home. And everything's awesome, right? And then 8 days later, I brought my oldest daughter to gymnastics practice. And, one of the other kids' mothers was like, hey, should I have a play date? Like, sure, why not? And a few hours later, it's sort of, parents' worst nightmare. I get a call from the mother. She's hysterical. And my daughter had been in a sledding accident, and she had a traumatic brain injury and fractured her skull, and she could have died. Sorry. So then that happened, and actually, not too long ago, I was diagnosed with PTSD related to that, which actually helped me understand my father a little bit more. My father had been in Vietnam. So a lot of the things that I was experiencing, I recognized from my father. So, but I ignored it. Again, I was like, oh, it'll get better, but PTSD doesn't get better. So I'm finding out. And I was more susceptible to it because of the other thing, the depression, anxiety, that kind of thing. So, yeah, sorry. So, my imagination and my visual sort of abilities have always been my strength, and it has been sort of part of my my struggle with this. So the PTSD is basically manifests in these sort of visual flashes of, so if there's a loud noise in the other room, it automatically in my brain, there's my kid in a pool of blood, So, so that's sort of constant throughout the day. So it's something that I'm sort of dealing with now, but it's also a way, it's something that we've talked to, our kids about, and a way for them to show them that it's okay to get help, um, and that, everybody struggles with things, and, it's okay to ask for help, and therapy is okay. So, um, so, I think that now that you sort of know my life story, I kind of want to mention a few things about how that comes into play with sort of my work and my teaching. And a lot of it has to do with some of these things that happen. So the doctor saying, he'll never have a normal life or dress himself or whatever. My father saying that I couldn't do things that I wanted to. I couldn't accomplish these things. That counselor at the hospital saying, oh, you guys will be in and out of the hospital the rest of your lives. I'm very sensitive to those kinds of statements, because those are like these limiting statements that don't allow for um, don't allow for good things to happen, and don't allow for people to reach their potential, or whatever that might be. So, um, as a professor, I have what I say, affects my students. Um, Even though I might not think they're listening most of the time, it does affect them, the things that I talk to them about. And, I remember one student early on that I had taken aside and I said, you could really be good at photojournalism. And, she said it helped shape her career. So, um, I'm very sensitive to what I say, and I'm very careful about what I say, but I try to find sort of those strengths in my students that I can get them to focus on, rather than things that they struggle with, or things that set them back, or that they just, for whatever reason, don't excel in. Well, there are things that you do excel in, so let's concentrate on those. And how can we turn that into, your future? Um, so, I have an opportunity every day to make a positive impact on these students' lives, and on my kids' lives. And it's a big responsibility, but at the same time, it's an honor to be in that position. Um, and it's something that I take pride in, and that I don't take lightly. It's, um, you know, I'm pretty lucky in the job that I have, that I can um, maybe make a difference in somebody's life, um, and not help them maybe overcome some of those hurdles, or those limiting statements that maybe they've heard. Um, and I've heard from a lot of students that, oh, well, I can't, my parents don't want me to be a journalism major because it's a dying industry, or whatever. And then they get a great job as a media producer somewhere, and so, it's really, I'm lucky to be, where I am, and to, I think, have gotten through some of the things that I have, so that I can um, sort of pass that along to some of my students. Like, if they're struggling with something, it's easier for me to help them get through it, because maybe I've been through something similar. And um, I think college, there's this sort of movement that, you don't need to go to college anymore. But I feel like college is where a lot of people figure it out, and not just in terms of getting a degree and figuring out how to pass a test, but figuring out sort of who they are, and how to overcome challenges, and maybe really figuring out what they want to do with their life. And I really enjoy that part of my job. Um, and I think, as educators, you know, college faculty, staff, whoever, the people involved in the student experience, have kind of a responsibility to help the students through that, and to kind of show them what they could do, and let them go there. Um, so, I think that's the most sort of rewarding part of my job. And, I get to help people every day, and I get to try to make a difference every day, and I hope I do. But, um, just sort of taking that extra minute. I've seen students just totally turn around in a class just by me saying, "Hey, I think you can do this," and total change. So, I try to do that as much as I can, because I know how difficult some of those statements can be, that, from parents or whoever, that you can't do this. But, well, maybe you can. And let's try to figure out a way for you to do that. Um, and I think a lot of times it's come up where the student needs some help, from a mental health perspective, a lot. And especially after COVID, um, you know, I brought a lot of students over to the counseling center before COVID, and I've brought probably a lot more since we came back from that. You know, I had students even tell me, like, I'm not really even comfortable being in the classroom anymore. Like, I just don't want to be around people anymore. And you're seeing that, we're seeing that more and more, you know, every semester, where students just don't know how to be together. They don't know how to work together. They don't want to go to an event. They don't want to go out and talk to people. You know, a lot of journalism, you know, one of the first assignments in one of the courses I teach is that you have to go out and get photos of people doing stuff on campus and get their names. And last semester I had 7 people drop first week because of that, because they don't want to engage. So I think that, you know, for me, I'm really pushing, and I've talked to the Keene State president about this as well. I'm really pushing for sort of added mental health services on campus, but also early engagement, you know, trying to engage more with first-year students and give them tools to manage stress, to learn how to take a test, to, you know, how do I manage my time? You know, I've been in high school and it's like, oh, 8 to 2 every day. It's not the same here, and there's sort of a lot of flexibility to get in trouble with, I guess you could say, where um, there's so much freedom right away when they get here that it's hard to manage. And if a student needs structure, so someone like me with ADD and still have trouble reading and anxiety and depression, I need structure. If I don't have structure, everything goes downhill. And students will come to college and you have to be here 2 days a week, and other than that, you're on your own. And I don't necessarily agree with, you know, sort of our current approach to helping to manage that transition, and giving students the tools right away to manage those things, and, you know, knowing when to get help, whether it's with tutoring or with depression or anxiety. When you know, here's when you should get help. Here are the people you need to talk to. You know, and giving them some sort of connection on campus that they can go to, whether it's a faculty member or a staff member. Um, you know, I don't think that we do enough with that. So that's something that I'm really pushing for now, and probably will be forever. You know, because to me, it's never sort of enough. You know, I think that mental health is absolutely tied to academic success. As much as people don't agree with me, you can't, if you're not feeling good, there's no way you're going to do well. You might, but you end up like me, where I just totally got in trouble, you know, because I wasn't taking care of myself. So it's like, yeah, I made it through, but you know, so I think that's one of my sort of primary goals, you know, as I go through my career, and it's completely tied to the success of my students. You know, just as much as me encouraging them, they need to be healthy at the same time. So, and if we don't teach them that at this point, then we're sort of failing them, because then they go out and get a job, and then there's more stress, and then a family. And, you know, if we can teach them that here, you know, they're going to be not only better set up to succeed in college, but just in their life in general. You know, I still do some of the stress management stuff I was taught in a class at community college that we had to take, you know. So, you know, those kind of things make a real impact. And I think the more we can do to address that, and not just sort of ignore it and let them deal with it on their own, then we're really doing our job, I think. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say. I guess this is the part where we would move to questions. Is that right?
Thank you so much, Julio. It was great to hear your story, and it's so important to use those lived experiences to help other people, have success in their lives, and very inspirational.
Thank you.
So yes, this is the time for Q&A, and we don't have the chat function enabled, but you can put your questions in the Q&A feature. And we have one question in. I really appreciated you talking about the limiting statements and that words matter. Do you have a daily or consistent practice of using positive affirmations for yourself as part of your recovery?
So for me, yes, I do. Short answer. It's interesting to talk about those limiting statements, and I'll give you kind of a good example of one that was sort of pervasive in my life, where sports was everything in my house growing up. Like, if you weren't, you needed to be playing a sport every season, all the time, whatever it might be. So, but I also remember, my father's sort of, I guess you would call them pep talks, but you know, there was a lot of like, hey, don't F up, right? And for a long time after that, when I would do pretty much anything, sports or otherwise, I'd kind of hear that in my head, don't F up. And for a while, it was like, where does that come from? Well, that's where it came from, where, I would have a game coming up or a game that day, and my dad would say something like that. And um, again, he wasn't a bad man. It was just sort of, I don't know if he was trying to tear me down or what, but so that stuck with me for a long time. And I started to do sort of thought replacement kind of thing, where I would hear that and then I would counteract it with something else. Um, and that could be anything from, I'm not gonna, to, sort of talking back to that reflex, or just sort of trying to breathe, or replacing it with just more of a, this is going to be a good shot, say if I were playing golf or something like that. And it took a long time, but I was able to sort of, that doesn't happen really anymore. And if it does, I know how to handle it. But I mean, every day is, to be honest, every day is tough. Every day I get up. There are a few days where I get up and I'm like, hey, I'm great. But a lot of days it's sort of a struggle to get out of bed. And I've been working on sort of, when I get up, that, okay, this is going to be a good day. Like, I have these negative feelings already, but it's just the start of the day. It's going to be a good day, and I have this to look forward to, and this, and I get to bring my kids to school and whatever. And so just trying to sort of shift that focus. So as soon as I recognize the negative thought or just the negative feeling, to say, oh, that's just, my body being protective, or whatever it might be, or it's just a habit of this negative thinking pattern. All right, I'm just going to kind of refocus, instead of sort of letting it snowball throughout the day, just sort of letting it go and trying to replace it with something positive as much as I can. And yeah, some days are better than others, but it's a good start, especially with the PTSD stuff right now, is that replacement of, I get that flash of this traumatic thing happening that's not actually happening, but me just saying, it's my body being protective of me or my kids or whatever, and it's just a thought, and let it go. So yeah, I do that a lot, and it's something I'm probably always going to have to do, and that's okay. But it's sort of like any other skill. I think the more I do it, the better I'm going to get at it. So
Thank you, Julio. We got a comment in that from Trisha from Youthwell, New Hampshire. saying that she'd like to discuss how you might be able to help with this vision. They may be able to help with your vision to support students at Keene State College.
Awesome.
We'll get connected afterward.
Great, thank you.
And she also wants to say thank you for sharing your story. Your courage is truly appreciated and inspired.
Thank you very much.
We also have a question. How do your family, friends, and colleagues feel about you publicly sharing your story?
So, my family, I mean, they know the story, and we've always kind of made it a thing in our house where you can talk about whatever you need to, and we've always kind of been honest with our kids, for better or worse. Sometimes it maybe gets us into trouble, but if say my wife or I are really not feeling well, and if our kids say, "What's wrong?" we don't say nothing, fine, because we don't want them to do that if they're not feeling well. We're not going to make a big deal out of it, but if we're like, "Oh, my head just hurts, I'll be okay, I'll take a nap," or whatever. So so for them, it wasn't anything. I think my son started crying during it. But I think they were okay. I think that my colleagues, like I said, nobody knew anything about it. I never really talked to anybody about it. And or with my students as well. But I think that it may, maybe it helped some people. And I think that, it was taken how I hoped it would have been taken, where it was like, hey, look, I'm just going to put myself out there because I know that a lot of my students and my colleagues are going through the same thing. And that, there is a way to get help, and that you can be successful even if you're going through these things. And I think a lot of times for students, they start to feel this way, and there's no hope there, which is obviously symptomatic of depression. But to show them and whoever else that even though you feel that way, there's a way to get through it, and it's not going to be easy, but just because you feel hopeless doesn't mean there's no hope. So I think that's generally how it was taken. So I feel okay about it. No, I can't hear you.
Oops. The next question we have is somebody says you're very inspirational. Would you ever consider taking to public school students and parents, taking your message to them?
Yeah, I think if there was an opportunity to, sort of like this presentation, if there's an opportunity, I'm always willing to do that. It's hard sometimes with my schedule, but like right after this, I have to go and teach. But um, but that's okay. If I can find the time and the opportunity, then I'm always happy to do that, because I feel like it. Like I said, if it helps one person, then it's worth it. So, yeah, absolutely.
So somebody says, looking back, do you still think you didn't care in high school? Or could it have been self-protection since you weren't getting the care you needed? An I don't care attitude can be off-putting for family unless we have or learn empathy. How can we approach that attitude more effectively?
Well, I think for me in high school, I think I didn't care because maybe I just felt sort of hopeless and I didn't really know what was happening. So it was sort of that give up response. Like, oh, well, I don't know what's wrong with me. I guess, and having heard certain things from my father, just saying like, well, maybe I am just worthless. So whatever, it's not worth it. Maybe part of it was, I didn't feel like I could do as well as I should be doing. So what's the point, kind of thing. I'm not really sure, but I think, the addressing that attitude, and I've had to address it, obviously with myself, but with my students and with my daughter. And my response to my students in particular, it would be very easy to sort of be like, they don't care about my class, so they're just going to get a 0 or whatever it might be. But I sort of actively engage those students more, because it's sort of like, you know it when you see it, kind of thing, where like, there's something going on, and a lot of times there is. So I try to actively engage when I can. Once in a while, the student might just drop. A lot of times they'll even drop out of school.
Yeah.
And I try to engage, but so when it comes to my students, I try to engage as soon as I notice it, and then try to point them in the direction of the help that they need. If I can't give them what they need. So, and with my kids too, we try to have that active discussion of, why are you feeling a certain way? And we try to talk about, what happened at school and whatever else is going on, and try to work through it. So I think that I don't care attitude is sort of a flag to, all right, I need to pay more attention. I need to try to see what I can do here. So I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Well, thank you so much, Julio. It was so good to hear you and your story and your words of wisdom. There are lots of words of encouragement in the Q&A, and I don't have time to read them all. And also want to encourage you to make sure you take care of yourself after the presentation, because that's really important as well.
Yes, and thank you all for having me. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but you can, if you do have a question you want to ask me, you can find my email on the Keene State website. I'm happy to answer any emails.
So I'm sharing my screen again, just a couple of slides. Of course, that hid my script, so bear with me just a moment. So thank you everyone for joining this session today. Be sure to check out our virtual expo center. Some of the booths, including NAMI New Hampshire's Information and Resources booth and the volunteer booth, will be staffed during lunch from 12 to 1. Be sure to check out all the booths, which can be accessed through the conference lobby. Please keep an eye out for an evaluation that will be emailed to you at the end of this conference. We appreciate your feedback on this session and the conference as a whole. If you need a certificate, you'll be able to download one after completing the survey. A recording of this session will be available in the conference lobby later this week. And then on the NAMI New Hampshire YouTube channel. Up next at 11:30, we have Brittany Porter, Kristen Welch, and Chad Meyer presenting on Stigma Doesn't Stand a Chance. NAMI Walks New Hampshire, and This Is My Brave. We'll see you there. Thank you again, Julie. Thank you, everyone, for